Welcome to Conversations with Keith. I'm Keith Lockhart, the conductor of the Boston Pops, and this is my chance to introduce you to some of the people on the stage and behind the scenes who make the Boston Pops America's orchestra. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Keith. Rhiannon Giddens and I recorded this conversation last month, shortly before the national outcry arose around the murder of George Floyd. Everything that has happened since illuminates why having these conversations is so important, and that racism in our music and our culture matters, both historically and in the context of the present conversation. I'm grateful for Rhiannon's work in artistry that bring these issues to light. In my 25 years at the Pops, I've done thousands of concerts and collaborated with hundreds of guest artists. Every now and then, you make music with someone who's so compelling as a performer and so unique as an artist that the experience lingers long after the hall is emptied. Those are the moments when a collaborative artist like myself says, "So that's why I do this." I can think of very few artists as compelling and unique as my guest this week. She joined the Pops for the first time on our July 4th concert in 2018 and came back to us in Symphony Hall with a fascinating exploration of some of the unjustly neglected voices which make up America's music. For Rhiannon Giddens isn't just a performer. She's a curator, a student, and an advocate of American music, a role which landed her a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship, the so-called Genius Grant, in 2017. She's a founding member of the Grammy Award-winning Carolina Chocolate Drops, and her breadth of performance as a singer, multi-instrumentalist, and composer is truly staggering. Please welcome Rhiannon Giddens.
I've got your picture that you gave to me, and it's signed with love, just like you used to be. The only thing different, the only thing new, I've got the picture, she's got you. I've got the records, all that we used to share, and they still sound the same, oh, as when you were here. The only thing different, the only thing new, I've got the records, oh darling, she's got you.
Hi, Rhiannon.
Hi, gosh, that was a very, very nice intro.
Oh, well, thank you. I hope your ears were burning just a little bit. It's so good to talk to you this way in the midst of, the kind of very weird world we find ourselves in right now. So, hey, let me ask you a question. It's always tough when introducing somebody like you because, being a musician, being an artist is both about having, obviously, something to say, but it's also about having a medium with which to say it. And you've got a lot of mediums with which to say it. So if somebody said, Rhiannon, what are you really? Are you a singer? Are you a fiddler? Are you a banjoist, if there is such a word? What defines you in terms of your medium?
Well, it's funny because, I guess I've been prepared for this my whole life because I've been asked, what are you my entire life? They just,
on a variety of different fronts.
Yeah, it was mostly my race. People are just, not happy until they know exactly what box to put me in. I'm not sure why, but I'm used to that. So when I got to music, I didn't make it any easier for myself, I'm afraid. I'm just interested in a lot of things, and I pretty quickly off the bat, as a vocalist, didn't want to just be a vocalist. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I wanted to learn more, of other things. So I used to say I'm a singer who plays, because voice is my best instrument and what I can express myself the easiest through. But so much of my mission and the guts of my work has been through my instruments. So now I don't even know anymore.
Well, it's good. It's really good to not be able to answer, to have such a good way of not being able to answer that question.
Yeah.
But you trained as a classical vocalist, Oberlin, I believe, and you still, that's still part of your your MO, the things that people know you for. Tell me about this, the project you have with the Metropolitan Opera, the ARIA project that I found absolutely fascinating.
That's been really fun. They approached me about doing a podcast. So it was the Metropolitan Opera's first main sort of podcast. It's called Aria Code, and they wanted somebody who can understand the music, but also could sort of cross some boundaries, which I guess I fit that bill. And it's been really fun working on that. Really deep diving into one aria per episode and bringing in a lot of people who wouldn't have, given it a chance, but the way that they have sort of structured it. And then, I'm bringing in some of my folks, of course, there's those people who don't know who I am, but that idea of going back to what the magic of opera is, which is storytelling, which is the connection to the human experience and demystifying some of that sort of aura that gets around it, so that kind of people who maybe aren't really in it kind of go, well, I don't know if I really want to bother trying to dig into that,
What sort of repertoire? What have you, are these all things that you would perform, that lie within your kind of range as a performer, or are you kind of going all over the map?
Oh, it's,
you're not doing Queen of the Night probably. So,
Well, no, it's all over the map because it's not tied to me at all. Marion Lazian, who's one of this like her brainchild really. And so we've been in collaboration with some of the things, but it's really all over the map. There's countertenor repertoire, soprano, tenor, bass. It's what's kind of also happening at the Met that season too. So there's lots to pull from. And so it's really what we're trying to do is to find a vibe for the season, and then things that fit that particularly well, and there's just so many great characters and stories in opera that people are just, kind of captivated by it.
It's a fascinating idea. And I think for the Met too, a real, a kind of a bravo moment of reaching outside of their normal cast of characters, to have somebody who has a truly different perspective on these things than people who do just that. But speaking of the world of opera, you have a opera that was ready and raring to go, I believe. That is going to be postponed. Tell me about Omar and about the Spoleto connection for that.
Yeah, I mean the world of opera. Much less leaving, I thought when I left opera, it was gone forever, and it's come back in very interesting ways. One of them being this connection with the Spoleto Festival. And Charleston approached me about the story of a man named Omar ibn Said, who was Islamic scholar from the western part of Africa, from Senegal. And he was captured and sold into slavery. And he was like 37 when he was captured, which is fairly, that's, kind of
advanced. That's old. Yes.
For especially back then. And he lived another 50 years as an enslaved person in North Carolina. He died in his late 80s or 90s, I can't remember, but like right before the Civil War. So he was never freed. And he wrote his autobiography in Arabic, which is an amazing feat, given that it was years after he had been living in the United States, and he had no community around him, no Arabic speakers or writers or any folks that so it was all from his memory, and the fact that he could command still the language to write his autobiography was really amazing. And he was a steadfast to the Quran, like until the day he died. He quoted it. He was very devout. And the main question, as time moved on, was, did he convert or not? Because they did make him go to a church, and he said that he converted, and they gave him a Bible in Arabic. But a lot of modern readings of his writings, which he wrote quite a bit, is pretty clear that he was steadfast, which is pretty amazing. He was an amazing kind of force of character. So the opportunity to tell his story in a way that, compositionally speaking, wasn't super tied into the Western art world while still being connected, It's been a really amazing challenge. I've been working with Michael Abels, a fantastic composer, film composer, but also classical composer. He wrote the score to that film Get Out, which was kind of a big deal, the Jordan Peele movie, and that's how I got to know him. And I said,
a wonderful movie, but by the way, it was just
yeah, and the score really stood out to me. And so when Spoleto approached me, I said, look, let me write the libretto and let me work with a composer who knows the orchestra and who can really be creative with these sounds that I'm going to be giving him. Banjo. I'm writing on banjos, fiddles, all sorts of stuff. And he is creating the symphonic landscape that matches, what I'm doing with my folk instruments. I mean, it's an unbelievable collaboration. I feel very lucky, except for the fact that it was supposed to debut last weekend.
Yeah. Except for that part, yes. Part. Postponed to next year, I'm assuming, like so many things? Or?
I hope, and even if we can't have the same amount of audience in, I'm hoping that we at least get to film it, that we can, that we can do something with it, because the energy has been pretty immense, and it's been a beautiful, there's a lot of things going on right now that need Omar's words, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I will hope for all of us then that we get to hear that. So what is the musical language that the two of you, is there conscientiously a kind of a North African sort of flavor to this, or is it south of the 1850s, or is it just a whole new language?
Kind of that. It's a little bit of all of the above, because I've synthesized things in a kind of a unique way, that I do have a art, classical education, but I didn't grow up hearing classical music, so it was relatively late that I got exposed to it, but then really, ingested it. And then I've been working in, folk idiom for years and years, and I've been getting into, so, the idea is that I'm pulling in things, I'm composing a lot on the banjo, so there's a lot of modality, there's a lot of modal tunes, there's a lot of ostinatos, and then there's moments where it shifts into straight up like operatic, Western writing that still has pieces of it, so it kind of shifts here and there. And in the way that Michael has, it's like I send him all these files, like I'm playing banjo, I'm playing viola, I'm overdubbing things, I'm singing all the parts, singing the tenor part, and because I compose.
I hope you're preserving those for posterity.
They're hilarious. But I compose vocally, so it's all recordings, and, the backgrounds are on instruments, and I send those to him. And then we have workshops, and I hear how he has put them on Western instruments. And it's like, oh, if I could have done that, I would. It's like he's reading my mind, which is, you yourself know there's so many different ways to adapt something for orchestra. There's so many different ways to take one thing, and you could do it a million different ways. And the fact that he's able to divine my intentions and make that, fit on a Western orchestra. We decided not to import African instruments and, have to have a banjo and all this kind of stuff. I was like, I'm writing this on the banjo, but I want to hear what it sounds like in the orchestra, and it sounds amazing. Yeah.
Tell me, because you've been talking a lot about composing on the banjo. The banjo is a passion of yours, I think, in some ways, because it also tells a story about the history of American music and how some voices have gotten lost or pushed aside along the way. But the banjo has African roots. Am I right there?
Yeah. I mean, the banjo for me is the ultimate emblem of America, because it is born in the Caribbean. So, but the instruments that, would have been the memories or the instruments themselves that then kind of morph into the banjo. People have to remember that Africans who are being brought to the Caribbean and to the United States were coming from all over. It was not a monolithic group. So they're bringing all different instruments, ideas of instruments, different languages, different modes, different systems of creating things. And it's syncretizes, whatever the word is.
Whatever that, I know what you meant.
It becomes its new thing in the Caribbean, and then is taken up with enslaved people into the United States, and then becomes an instrument What's fascinating is that for, a couple hundred years, it's known as just a African American instrument. And then it becomes the emblem of minstrelsy.
Exactly.
You
When
know,
I think of it, I think of it in white minstrel show tradition. I think, I don't think of it as being a black folk music instrument. And, you've helped me change that, and the different ways that the banjo can be used. I mean, unfortunately, it's been almost become a very stereotypical instrument in people's perception, but it doesn't match the reality of what the instrument was originally there for.
exactly. And that's been, I find as I do my research that was done deliberately. It was an advantage was taken of some demographic shifts in the 20s, the advent of the recording industry to push a white nationalist and supremacist agenda of what American music is. And the banjo is the centerpiece of that.
Did you grow up playing banjo, or is that kind of a late pickup when you started exploring this kind of music?
It was a late pickup because when I was a kid, I just knew bluegrass style, or I would have, Pete Seeger style, kind of folky style, bluegrass. The idea of the banjo as a white instrument, hee-haw, the idea of Black people playing the banjo was not, it wasn't until my mid-20s and I met, the older Black fiddler that I learned from, Joe Thompson. It wasn't until that time that I learned the truth.
Well, you've been talking a little bit about, you said something kind of laughingly earlier about people trying to get you to self-identify for years now. And I was just thinking about, you have such a unusually broad perspective of what makes American music. And you come, I believe, from a mixed race household as a child.
I kind of regard myself as a real Southerner. My family's been all branches of my family have been in the South for years and years and years. I'm this mixture of white, Black, and I know there's Native in different branches, not enough to know what particular tribe, I can make some guesses, but it almost doesn't matter to me because there's so many of us like that. There's so many mixtures like that in the South, that white, Black, and red kind of, thing that actually is the culture of the South. So I kind of feel like I'm a good representation actually of like North Carolina. I'm like, my family is like root. So yeah, I mean, I've come to terms with that. I mean, when I grew up, there was the box for white and box for Black. There wasn't even an other. It was like you had to pick one, and I had to X out one of my parents by picking a box. I mean, I have so many memories like that. And so, as an adult, I finally came to peace with that by just claiming my North Carolinianness and my Southern.
Well, I mean, you have such an active. I was looking at your concert schedule, and especially the projects you're doing with Francesco right now, which I'd love to have you talk a little bit more about. But so much of what seems to be a very passionate fan base for you and what you do is European. And you're spending quite a bit of time over there as it is. Does it give you a kind of a more objective view back on American music to be a little bit removed from it, or is there frankly just a more passionate fan base for interesting and new kind of things there?
No, I mean, my fan base is still pretty rooted in America in terms of numbers. I mean, totally. Like I could gig all year. Well, and when there's gigs again, I could gig all year round in the States. I'm still kind of growing my audience in Europe, but the difference that I have noticed, and it goes all the way back to my Carolina Chocolate Drop days, the band that I was in before I went solo, the Black String Band, is that the knowledge of American music in a lot of large parts of Europe is much more in depth and interested than a lot of places in the United States. And the journalism, the questions we would get asked, and I get asked, are much deeper, and they're much more willing to go into questions of race and history and all that stuff than a lot of the questions that I was getting in the States. I'm starting to get to that level now. People have been asking me really, really great questions, but for a long time, that interest was really in Europe. And I think it does, the distance does help, when you're looking back across, you can see things, but that perspective is always very interesting. And people would like journalists would say, well, of course we've known about I knew about the banjo being an African American, and I was just like, well, but the narrative has been pretty firmly, strongly told in the United States, and has been backed up by things like the Beverly Hillbillies, by Deliverance, by these really big media pieces that can really change the landscape for years and years and years. So it's been an interesting perspective for sure.
Well, I'm thinking that since we've been talking about the banjo and it's not a new take, perhaps it's a very old take, but your different take from what we're used to about it. We'd love to see you doing some work on the banjo with the Boston Pops.
There were 3 sailors, bold and true, with cargo they did carry. They sailed away on the ocean blue for the love of Spanish Mary. So deeply now were they disturbed, no longer could they tarry. Swoon and swerve for the love of Spanish Mary.
Tell me about Francesco Teresa and this Teresi and this new musical collaboration you have. When 2 multi-instrumentalists get together, what happens? Especially when one's Italian.
Well, yeah, it's been really amazing, actually, because we've been talking about my connection to American music and the history of American music, and meeting Francesco kind of widened I like to say zoomed me out, right? Because I've been very focused on what we've been doing in the States, but of course nothing exists in a vacuum, and the States didn't just kind of pop into being. People came from other places and brought their own, all their own beautiful and ugly things to what became the United States. And meeting Francesco kind of like widened my perspective to where American music sits in the global context. And that was I needed that at that. I've been kind of too insular, and I needed the look out, because he's another interesting, kind of weirdo like me. Box. He was classically trained. He was trained as a jazz pianist. He went to conservatory, trained as a jazz pianist, got interested in early music, and ended up doing a concentration in early music and playing the harpsichord. I mean, it's just a road I don't think anybody else has taken. And then got into the folk instruments of his country, Italy. It's particularly the South. His family's Sicilian. Frame drums, tambourines, all these incredible percussive instruments, and the, piano, accordion. He's just, kind of insatiable. He's always questioning, and he was making these connections with European music that paralleled what I was doing with American music, i.e. so much of European music, particularly when you talk about the Renaissance, which is really so much of the heart of then what becomes, art music, Western art music. So much of that was brought in by, the Arabic culture that swept through Spain, swept through Italy, swept through, all of Europe, that kind of became the Renaissance. All the instruments that came from instruments that were brought by them, from even the Far East,
Sure. I mean, Marco Polo. I mean, all the things that they'd never seen before showed up in the 1200s into European music. But the difference, that must be an overwhelming task, because at least with America, we have the conciseness of only a couple hundred years of this history, and you've got 1,000 years to deal with there.
Yeah, it's tough, but it's interesting because what you see are some parallels of the narrative being rewritten, right? And we have like 400 something years in the States. Don't shortchange us. Like, it's been going on actually for a long time when you think about we often forget that a lot of stuff started in South America and the Caribbean before it even came up to the United States. So there's this long connection. But when you talk about, Europe trying to pretend that the Moors weren't there, even though the lute is basically an oud, so many of these things, Arabic numerals, and I mean, it just kind of goes on and on. And there has been that narrative of, oh, really? Is that what happened? I don't know. And so that's been frustrating him because he's just like, this is proof. This is proof that it's been like this forever.
That it's all intermingled. But it makes me. It's talking to you about music and looking at what I know of your body of work. Obviously you draw inspiration as a musician, as an artist, from somebody like Francesco, who brings new thoughts, new ideas, new crazy compositions, as you said, a route that nobody else had ever taken. But also with me, it seems like the historical record, and if you will, if there is such a thing, historical justice seems to be something that drives you onward. There seems to be part of you that really wants to set the record straight, because it should be set straight, and we should give acknowledgement. It's too late to, there's nothing that can be done for the number of disenfranchised artists whom we've ignored over the years, except to recognize their legacy. And it seems when you talk about the banjo, when you talk about Omar, about the new opera, that's a lot of what drives you forward.
Definitely. I mean, I was that kid, evidently, that, the teacher would come in and I'd be sitting on another kid's head because they took the toy from yet a third kid, I just can't stand the idea that people are getting away with basically lying about where we come from, when it's also a matter of life and death. The way that America has formed, the way that people respond to other people is through these years of conditioning of we're different, we have nothing in common. And it's like, while we enjoy the cultural fruits of all the mixing that America has been, I mean, we all enjoy American music, and that is the best of what we are. Food and music is always the best of humans, because that's where all the mixing happens. That's where all the edges rub, and then something new comes, and then all of a sudden that's what everybody has to have, and this is, so in music, it infuriates me when people, for these sort of overarching reasons of power, subjugation, take something that is innocent, music, and twist it, because that's what happens when these narratives are erased. That is twisting something that is actually pure. We don't have much about us that's pure.
Yeah. So why lie about what little we have? And try to pretend it happened a different way than it happened, to keep the narrative with, making the people in power comfortable about the situation.
But the problem is that it's not just comfortable. It's like, it really adds to an overall disparity, So cultural capital is a real thing.
And it's also where the story is told. Exactly. Cultural capital gives you, access to the language by which we tell the stories. And if you control the voice, eventually you control the history. So there you are. I'm thinking
important.
Some of the original work you've done too. It goes to this theme of it's, as I said, righting wrongs is not the right way, but acknowledging. Going honest on these things. And I'm thinking of one of the most just kind of stop you dead in your tracks things that you did with us was the song that I believe you wrote called At the Purchaser's Option.
Yes. Yeah.
The title is kind of innocuous enough, but if you'd care to tell us what the title is about, then I'd love to show a clip of you doing that with us.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you don't want the song, you don't want the title to be an indelible part of the song, but it kind of has to, it kind of is. It does give you something extra, you know, when you know the story of the song, even though I you know, hope it stands on by itself if you never know what the title is from. I was sort of, I was just looking, I was researching basically, and I came across, there's a lot of these you can look at. They're advertisements for people. I was really getting interested in the banality, whatever the word is, of an economic system such as slavery, because when you have transactions happening every day, you know, people being bought and sold, there's a structure that surrounds that is actually, when you take the people out of it, is just like any other capitalist structure. And it's all the more horrific because the capital is human beings. And so, you know, looking at these advertisements and thinking they're just like an ad for a used car. You know, she's a little long in the tooth, but she's still got some years in her. I mean, practically very similar language. And there was one I came across, and it was about a young woman. And this was an ad in 1798 in New England. And that's the other thing I like to say about this, because people forget that slavery was everywhere, you know. And it said at the end, she has with her a 9-month-old baby who was at the purchaser's auction. And the enormity of what that meant, of what that phrase, innocuous as it seems without the backstory, that phrase just summed it up for me. It was like, at the purchaser's auction, this woman has no control over anything, no part of her. Like, not even the thing that you would think is a God-given right, your own fruit of your womb, no matter how it was put there, most likely by rape, but whatever, it's still your, like, flesh of your flesh. You have no control over that, no control over anything. And so I just started thinking about her.
Kind of the ultimate dehumanizing thing, when even your children are no longer your own. Well, it's an amazing experience to share the stage with you, with performing that, and let's see it.
A babe, but shall I keep him? 'Twill come the day when I'll be weeping, but how can I love him any less? This little babe upon my breast. You can take my body, you can take my bones, you can take my blood, but not my soul. You can take my body, you can take my bones, take my blood, but not my soul. Body dark and strong. I was young, but not for long. You took me to bed, a little girl, left me in a woman's world. You can take my body, you can take my bones, you can take my blood, but not my soul. You can take my body, you can take my bones, take my blood, day I work the line, every minute overtime, fingers nimble, fingers quick, my fingers bleed to make you rich. You can take my body, you can take my bones, you can take my blood, but not my soul. You can take my body, you can take my bones, take my blood, but not my soul. You can take my body, you can take my bones, you can take my blood, but not my soul. You can take my body, you can take my bones, take my blood, but not my soul.
So I know you're from Greensboro, and you're coming home to do a role at Opera Greensboro, I believe, Greensboro Opera. But you're going to do, for the first time, you're going to do Bess in Gershwin's Porgy and Bess. And I wanted to ask you both, about the challenges of doing that role, and really going back to doing a extremely difficult and extremely extensive operatic role, but also how you feel about the piece. There are Black artists who are conflicted.
And it's tricky, Aria Code, we did an episode on Porgy and Bess, and we had some of these discussions because I have always had a hard time with Porgy and Bess because I'm always like, it's the Black opera and wasn't even written by Black people. It's full of
written
stereotypes.
by a young Jewish composer from New York.
Well, you also have to remember, so was Strange Fruit, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't automatically disqualify it. It's just, it's frustrating because we do one. It's like, if there was a hand, if there was a bunch, I wouldn't care. But it's like, it's hard when that is the one. And then there are so many stereotypes in it. Mm-hmm. But of course, the music is glorious. It doesn't quite know what it wants to be. It's not
music theater or opera or right.
So there's those issues with it, whatever. I mean, that stuff doesn't matter to me so much. But really the reason I said yes to that was because there is, by dint of it being one of the only productions that A, is full of Black people, characters, Black characters, and B, given that they have put it in the stipulation that only Black singers can sing the roles, it's a sure bet. So there's a lot of, I've always felt a bit left out. That's what I'm saying. It's like, it's not that in and of itself disqualifies it. You know what I mean? It's just that it's frustrating because there's only one. So it would be nice. It's one of those things I would love to add to that instead of
Please do.
Replace Porgy and Bess and kick it to the curb. Let's just add to it. Let's just add to it, and that's kind of more, because I think that's yet another story that hasn't really been explored to the fullest, the relationship musically between Jewish Americans and African Americans. I mean, there's a long history there as well, particularly in New York. And I think it's also part of that history. So it's important in that way too.
Tell me about Art is Alive.
Art is Alive is a website that I was in Australia when everything hit, the virus had been sort of shutting down China and Hong Kong and stuff, but it was starting to shut down other countries too. And so we canceled the tour, the dates in Japan, and we canceled the rest of our Australian tour and hightailed it home, like right in front of all of the border closings. And as we were, it was kind of this chaos and figuring out, I just started freaking out because I was like, everything's going to cancel. Everything's canceling. I wasn't worried for myself because, I'm funded. I mean, I am worried, but I know I can pay my rent.
Right. You weren't as worried for yourself as you are for so many of our colleagues. I mean, for all of us, I mean, I feel very fortunate. I'm scared because I don't know what's going to be left when we come out of the bunker.
No, it's and so I've been worried a lot for, folks like, people in my band, or people who do sound, people who do lights, stuff that you can't, it's all behind the scenes. So what happened to those folks, and what happens to people who just, they're just starting out and they put all their money into their album tour and it's all gone, It's like, so what I was trying to do, and I was talking to Amanda Palmer, who is a wonderful performer and who has a very strong direct relationship with her fans. And so anyway, I just reached out to her and I said, what are we going to do to help as established artists? How do we help people who maybe aren't established, and blah blah blah. And so this idea of starting the website, I'm kind of in the stage now where we built this thing, but now it's like, what's the next stage? I'm not sure, where its usefulness lies. But what was happening as I was seeing all of these, funds for artists and lists of where you could go to get a grant and all this but they were kind of scattered everywhere. So it's a clearinghouse of all those links, and then also trying to be the other side, which is, if you want to support artists, here's all the streaming stuff that's happening. Here's where to go for this. Here's where to go for that. So kind of aiming to be one place so that.
So it's kind of a nerve center, a clearinghouse, so that both artists can see where they might be able to get help or support, and where people who want to support or help or just engage can find out how to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the idea, so that you're not having to do this, and I myself was kind of going, what's going on? I think it's helped a lot of people, and, I'm going to keep it up as long as it is needed.
What are you working on right now? What's the project? Besides working on raising 2 kids and that sort of thing, what sort of creative project are you working on now?
Well, I'm finishing. There's a few things I need to finish on the opera, Omar. But I'm working on a book proposal about the history of American music. But the thing that I'm actively working on right now is something called it's an organization called Patreon. So, you were talking about how things are different for us now as artists. You have nothing to conduct. I have no audiences to sing for. It's a little weird because, we are kind of conditioned to believe that we are what we do. We're not, of course. It's only a piece of what we do, but it's very hard to feel like you're not fulfilling your purpose. And so Patreon is, for me, is a way to, it's what it is a way that fans can directly support the musicians that they love or the artists that they love. There's a lot of like podcasters and visual artists and things like that on there, but it's like so much of what we do is kind of at the mercy of the live show and at the mercy of promoters and venues and everything. So this is a way to say, what do you want to hear from us? And we can, as much as we can do on a digital platform, we have to pivot right now. And our community we can't go to our community. So we have to create pathways to them through this machine, through the technology that we have. And we also, I think it's an opportunity, as depressing and stressful as this time is for all of us in the arts. It's also an opportunity, I think, for us to remind people of how important the arts is, because people are missing it.
And we will, I hope, sooner rather than later, see each other on the other side and get to make music together, which would be a dream come true for me. So stay strong. Thank you for spending time with me today, and stay safe and get ready, be in the starting gate. So when they let us out of our cages, we can go do what we do. Thank you, Rhiannon.
Thank you.
Pretty little girl with a blue dress on, pretty little girl with a dress on, pretty little girl with the blue dress on, stole my mule and away she's gone. Sheep's in the meadow, cows in the corn, swing that girl with the blue dress on.
Thank you for watching Conversations with Keith. To see more musician-created content, visit bostonpops.org/at-home. Don't miss the next video by hitting subscribe. We'll see you next time.
Keep the music playing. Scan this QR code image with your smartphone's camera app to donate today.